All right, here we go. Day 5 of our 6 days of challenge. And by now, if you've been doing the worksheets and going to the breakout homework sessions, the group sessions, then you are having some breakthroughs. Because when we're honest with ourselves in doing this work, we have breakthroughs. We're bringing the darkness to the light. Yesterday, we were talking about our routines. Today, we are talking about interrupting the patterns. I spoke a little bit about this yesterday, and today I'm going to share a little bit more. As I said yesterday, so much of our momentum in our spiritual healing and transformation comes from interrupting the patterns. So let me explain what I mean by that. I was saying yesterday that I or actually the day before, I had the thing of recognizing that I would get so uplifted in doing spiritual practice, taking spiritual classes and things like that, that then I would feel compelled to bring my vibration back down. That was a pattern of mine. I didn't feel comfortable in the high vibration, so I would do something to make myself feel ashamed, feel bad, feel wrong, and go into self-judgment, feeling that I couldn't break out of the habit and the patterns of playing small. So then I would just feel hopeless and helpless, stuck like a victim. And then I would go into the self-medication, and then the next day I would feel hungover with the shame, and even hungover from the effects of alcohol and cigarettes and food and staying up too late and all those kinds of things. So those were my patterns. And there were other patterns I had as well. So when I realized, like I did with the frozen yogurt, that I could say, wait a minute, who wants the frozen yogurt? Is it me, or is it the ego? Well, you see, what I forgot to say in the video the other day is, once I realized, oh, it's ego pattern, this is what's happening is I'm trying to see, can I entice myself into repeating the same old pattern because I'm uncomfortable with this high vibration? Or is there another choice? So what I did in that moment to interrupt the pattern was I said, okay, what is it I would really like to do? Do I want the frozen yogurt? No, I know that. So what would I like? And I knew instantly that it was the leftover chicken and vegetables that I had at home, and which wouldn't take me, it would be easier actually to just go home and heat up those leftovers, which is exactly what I did. And I can still remember the feeling that I had after I ate that chicken and vegetables. I felt terrific. I'd hung on to my high vibration. I had been self-loving. I interrupted the pattern. It was a victory for me, for spirit. It was a victory. So that's what interrupting the patterns can give us, this victory feeling, okay? So, and the more we do it, the more the patterns fall away, because the patterns have no power. Only spirit has power. We have the power. So interrupting the patterns is what we're after here. That's what this challenge has been about. It's been about really getting awareness about the patterns, about what triggers us into the patterns, so we can interrupt the patterns and shift the energetics. It's very powerful and it works. So in the worksheet today, what I've given you is a list of things that you can do to interrupt the patterns. Now, let me say this. In Masterful Living and in Finding Freedom, in my classes, I have workbooks and journals, and in there, I have a list of things what to do in case of meltdown or freak out. And these things are on that list. And it's things like very simple ways to interrupt the patterns. And here's what I used to do. I used to say, okay, I feel really tempted to self-medicate. So I feel tempted to go out and get a bottle of wine, a six-pack of beer, a pack of cigarettes, some food, whatever it is that I'm going to then isolate, go into my pattern of isolating and self-medicating. And I'd say, okay, Jennifer, if that's what you'd like to do, you can do it, because you are the boss of you. So you can do whatever you'd like to do. But first, I'm going to have a big glass of spring water. So I would drink my big glass of spring water. And I'd say, first, I'm going to say a prayer. First, I'm going to go for a quick walk around the block. 5 minutes, I'm out. Maybe 10 minutes, takes 10 minutes to walk around the block. I had a big block. And, but then I'm out in nature. Or maybe I just go down, when I lived in LA, I'd go down through the courtyard out to the front gate and pick up my mail, just breaking up the pattern in some way, getting outside, getting some fresh air for a minute. There were all these things that I would do to interrupt the pattern. I could make a list of things that I was grateful for, just start mentally making a list of the things I'd be grateful for. So then after I would do some of these things, the pattern had been interrupted. I got my power back. Very important. And then once I have my power back, I'd say, okay, now Jennifer, what would you like to do? And very often I'd be like, yeah, I don't feel like self-medicating anymore. I had raised my vibration enough, but not too much, but just enough to move out of that and into self-love. And then I could pick something loving for my time. It was usually my evening. So that really worked for me. It really worked for me. And often I would pick something self-loving for myself that would be really supportive. Like, oh, you know what? I'm going to spend a half an hour organizing my closet. Oh, you know what? I'm going to run that errand I've been putting off. Oh, you know, I'm going to make that call I've been putting off. So I would do things that would even increase my feeling of self-love and self-care even more. Simple. It's so simple. People in Masterful Living tell me all the time that interrupting the pattern really worked for them. And it really works if you feel like you're melting down, because for me, a lot of times when I would go into self-medication, it was also because I felt upset, because I got triggered in some way, that I felt hurt, I felt angry, I felt disappointed, I felt unloved, not understood, misunderstood, all these kinds of things. These emotional triggers would happen, and then I'd like to go into self-medication to drown out my feelings, right? To dim my feelings and to disconnect from my feelings. Fantasy was another way that I would disconnect from everything. So when I felt those triggers, those emotional triggers, I found that these kinds of interrupting the patterns, habits, would really serve me, especially if I was emotionally triggered and upset. So then I'm feeling good about myself because I didn't succumb to the pain train. Pain train is something we talk quite a bit about in Masterful Living. Recognizing when the pain train is pulling into the station and deciding not to get on the pain train. Or let's say you got on the pain train that you're going to get off, right? So that was something that I also was very familiar with. So I'd get triggered, and then I'd go to the store, I'd get a pack of cigarettes, I'd get a 6-pack of beer or something like that, and I'd come home and I'd start drinking and smoking while watching television, maybe eating something like popcorn, potato chips, something like that. I don't have a sweet tooth very often. And so I would get on there, and then I would realize I'm on the pain train. I've got to get off. And so I would take that pack of cigarettes, I'd walk to the sink, and I'd just douse them in water. So then there was no going back from there. And throw them in the trash. Break them, throw them in the trash, right? I had to douse them in water, because if I just broke them, I could still dig them out of the trash. Maybe you're familiar with something like that. Pour the alcohol down the sink. Get rid of it. Get it out. So those were the things that I would do sometimes to interrupt the patterns. But the very best thing was, before I started self-medication, if I could say to myself, but first I'm going to do these things. It's surprising. It really is surprising how a big glass of spring water, a prayer, some gratitudes while you're walking around the block, all of which you can do in 15 minutes, can save you hours and hours of shame. It can save you money, time, and energy. It can really shift your life if you're willing to practice it. And just being willing to practice it is an act of self-love. And since love is the only true healer, when we're self-loving, we're having a healing. And so is everyone else, because we're one with everyone. So it's really valuable to look at these different ways that we can interrupt the patterns. Another thing is, while you're interrupting the patterns, while you're noticing the patterns, you're observing them, you are disconnecting from the false identity of the one who's helpless and hopeless and is being magnetically drawn into these patterns and has no power. When you can stand back and recognize, wait a minute, I have the power to decide. I can choose differently. You are taking your power back, and you're separating from that identification with the false self who has no power, who is helpless and hopeless. So one of the things then you can begin to do is you can begin to look at the stories you're telling yourself, because that's part of the pattern too. It certainly was for me to go into the pattern of, well, nobody understands me, they don't really blah, 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 they're disrespecting me, no matter what I do, blah, 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 they always, why is it so hard, blah, 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 all these different stories. Do yourself a favor. In full disclosure with yourself, start to write down these stories that you tell yourself. Because this is what the ego mindset does, is it looks for the story. It becomes part of the repeating pattern. So interrupting these patterns also includes you saying, that's not my story. That's an ego story that has nothing to do with me. My story is a story of God's glory, and that's all I'm interested in. We can shift so much. This challenge is just 6 days. It's just 6 days. Masterful living is an entire year. We're going to do so much this year towards our healing and loving ourselves free of these patterns of being on the pain train. Sometimes it takes months and months of work for us to really get to the place where we can see we have reached higher ground. It's worth everything that we can put into it, because there's nothing we can do out there in the world that will ever bring us as much benefit as what we can do changing things in here. Year after year, I hear the most magnificent stories of how people change their hearts and their minds. They changed their habits and their patterns. And not only did it shift their life and their experience, it helped heal their relationships, helped heal their body, helped heal their finances and their careers, and it rippled out to all of their loved ones. And many people have beautiful stories to tell of how their relationships healed, how others in their family were healed and inspired, that they were shifted. Parents with grown children, parents with little children, grandparents with their grown children and grandchildren, all kinds of healings rippling out. Because when one person is shifted and their thinking is shifted, they help the whole family move out of all kinds of patterns. It is absolutely miraculous. So that's why I commend you for having the courage to do this work, because it will shift all the people around you. It will shift your relationships. It will shift so much in your life. So I'm very glad we're doing this together. Be sure to come to the homework sessions, and I love, and admire you. Thank you for joining me again today. Mwah.